My husband, Marcellus, was in the midst of preparing dinner when a message popped up on his phone from a coworker. "Boss, I miss you." After a brief moment of hesitation, I took matters into my own hands and replied on his behalf, "Come over. My wife isn't home today." It wasn't long before the doorbell rang, and the color drained from Marcellus's face, leaving him as pale as a ghost. In the expansive kitchen of our luxury Buckhead condo, the rich, comforting aroma of slow-cooked oxtails filled the air. It was the scent of home, of the blissful family life everyone dreams of, or at least, that's what I had wholeheartedly believed until that very moment. Marcellus stood at the stove, stirring the simmering pot, wearing the navy blue apron I had gifted him for our wedding anniversary, while humming a classic R&B love song. From behind, he projected the image of the perfect, successful black man, a consummate professional who also knew how to cherish and provide for his family. He always told me that earning a living was a man's duty, but cooking at home for his wife was a privilege he relished. I was idly flipping through an architectural magazine at the kitchen island, but my thoughts were far away. The warm yellow light illuminated the pristine marble countertop where Marcellus's brand new iPhone lay silently. Its black screen was like a dark, unfathomable abyss, concealing secrets that even I, his wife and closest confidant, had never suspected. Marcellus turned around, a radiant smile lighting up his handsome face. The fine lines beginning to etch themselves around his eyes only added to his charm. He asked me to taste the gravy, to see if the seasoning was just right, before turning back to his meticulous blend of spices. And that's when it happened. The phone screen on the counter suddenly illuminated without a sound, a cold blue flash signaling a WhatsApp message. My eyes were immediately drawn to it. "Connie, as young and pretty as you are, I'm sure you have plenty of men chasing after you. Me, on the other hand, I'm getting older. I have to hold on tight to this man, so he doesn't get away. I'm scared someone might steal him in a moment of carelessness. They say there are a lot of thirsty side chicks popping up like mushrooms after the rain these days, right?" Connie flinched and lowered her head abruptly. She clenched her fists so tightly that her fingertips turned white. She knew perfectly well who I was referring to. The term thirsty side chicks, though uttered lightly, was as sharp as a razor, severing the last shred of her pride. The words hung in the air, making the atmosphere even more uncomfortable. Connie didn't dare answer my question. She mumbled something unintelligible and avoided my probing gaze. I could see her fragile shoulders shaking violently, despite her efforts to control herself. The confidence and flirtatiousness with which she had arrived at my house had vanished completely, leaving only the image of a sinner awaiting judgment. But I wasn't going to let them escape that easily. I turned to Marcellus and squeezed his arm a little tighter, my nails digging slightly into his skin through the shirt, reminding him of my powerful presence. I looked at my husband, changing my voice to a honeyed tone but maintaining a gaze as sharp as a knife, and asked him about the lake house in Blue Ridge that we had gone to see last week. I spoke loudly and clearly, making sure Connie heard everything. I reminded him that her parents had always cherished the land, believing it possessed a positive energy, and its proximity to the river offered a welcome coolness. I made sure to mention that my parents had pledged $15,000 towards the renovation, a gift intended for their future grandchildren. The moment I brought up the subject of children, I felt Marcellus stiffen. It was a sensitive area for him. The man I had loved and trusted unconditionally was nothing more than a dirty liar, a coward, incapable of taking responsibility for his actions. Marcellus's silence only added fuel to the fire of my anger. I didn't need his empty apologies. I wanted him to confront the harsh reality he had tried so desperately to conceal. I went to my purse, which was resting on a cabinet, and pulled out a stack of papers I had prepared that very afternoon. They were the pieces of evidence I had been secretly gathering for the past week, ever since I had begun to suspect something. I threw the papers in his face. The white sheets scattered and fell haphazardly over the shattered phone. Marcellus picked up a piece of paper. His hands were shaking violently. It was a bank statement detailing the last 3 months of transactions. I had circled and highlighted the transfers to Connie Jenkins with vague descriptions like gift or lunch. The amounts weren't huge, a few $100s each time, but the frequency was suspiciously high. One transfer stood out, $1,500 from last week with the memo. Happy birthday. I pointed to the statement and raised my voice. And how do you explain this money? A $1,500 birthday gift for an intern? For my birthday, a bouquet of flowers and a simple dinner were enough for you. Your generosity is truly admirable. Marcellus was speechless, drenched in sweat. He hadn't expected me to know his finances in such detail. But that wasn't all. I pulled out the screenshots of his WhatsApp conversations that I had taken from his iPad, where he had forgotten to log out. Flirty messages, lunch and movie dates, and even expressions of sickeningly sweet longing. I tossed another photo. It was a movie ticket from 2 weeks ago at 11 p.m. That day, he had told me he was running late due to a client dinner, but in reality, he was watching a movie with his mistress. And finally, I produced a photo of a long, dyed brown hair found on the passenger seat of his car. The price he paid was exorbitant, but entirely his own fault. I received the money from the house sale and the asset division. It was a considerable sum, enough to start a new life. Instead of a large apartment like before, I chose a smaller, cozier condo in a quiet neighborhood filled with trees. I decorated my new home to my taste. Gone were the ostentatious, flashy furniture pieces that had catered to Marcellus's vanity. In their place, I chose soft beige tones, fresh plants, and a simple solid wood bookshelf. Every corner of the house reflected my personality and exuded an uncommon peace. Tonight, I've invited Lysandra to the housewarming. We're sitting on the balcony in the cool breeze, sipping red wine and gazing at the illuminated cityscape. Lysandra toasted to my liberation, to having escaped that disaster. I smiled and clinked my glass against that of my invaluable friend. Without her strength and resolve, I probably wouldn't have weathered this storm with such fortitude. My phone vibrated with a notification. My direct deposit had arrived. I've been promoted to team lead after successfully managing a major project. The intense work had helped me gradually distance myself from the pain of the past. I opened Facebook and saw a message from a stranger. Her profile picture was a sunflower in full bloom. She was thanking me. It turned out that Lysandra had anonymously shared my story on a women's forum, changing all the names and personal details in order to alert others. The woman told me that reading my story had given her the courage to leave her husband, who had been mistreating her and cheating on her for years. Reading the message, I felt a strange warmth in my heart. My pain hadn't been entirely in vain. It had become a source of motivation and a lesson for other women navigating a sea of suffering. I took a deep breath, enjoying the fresh air of the autumn night. The past remained behind me, closed off behind the courthouse doors. The message preview was brief, but it was enough to shatter the peaceful world I had painstakingly built with my own 2 hands. Sender, Connie, intern content. Boss, I miss you. Just 4 words. I miss you. My heart didn't ache anymore. That pain had died a week earlier when I held the incriminating bank statement in my hands. All that remained now was a deep-seated contempt and a meticulously crafted plan. I knew that name. She was the new intern who had joined Marcellus's department a few months ago. I remembered Marcellus mentioning her once, praising her for being sharp, polite, and eager to learn. What I hadn't imagined was that her eagerness to learn would extend to her boss's husband. I took a deep breath, attempting to calm my racing pulse. The level-headedness of a 30-something black woman who had overcome countless obstacles to get to where she was in life prevented me from screaming or breaking things. If I made a scene, Marcellus would conjure up some flimsy excuse, dismissing it as a silly joke from an immature girl. I needed more than that. I needed undeniable proof, evidence that couldn't be denied. Marcellus continued chopping vegetables, the rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board masking the frantic beating of my heart. Quietly, I picked up the phone. The passcode was our wedding anniversary. The irony was almost laughable. He used the most important day of our lives as a shield for his dirty little secrets. I entered the 6 familiar digits, and the screen unlocked, revealing the WhatsApp conversation with the unread message at the top. Without opening the message, I quickly typed a reply, my fingers cold and precise as they glided over the virtual keyboard. Come over. My wife isn't home today. I hit send, watching the blue double check marks appear, and a faint smile played on my lips. I took a screenshot of that brief exchange, sent it to my own phone, and then meticulously deleted any trace of it from Marcellus's device. We had been married for 6 years, yet we had consistently postponed starting a family, waiting until we achieved financial security. And now, just when we were finally ready, I was confronted with this betrayal. But I had deliberately introduced the topic of children. I recognized it as our strongest connection, the foundation of family and the social acceptance that a fleeting affair with someone like Connie could never provide him. I painted a vivid picture of a joyful family, filled with the sounds of children's laughter. Next year would be the perfect time to start trying for a baby, I declared. Considering our age, it's the ideal moment, and I'm really hoping for a boy. Then, turning directly to Connie, I asked if she didn't agree it was a wonderful plan. Caught off guard by the direct question, Connie visibly startled, causing the teaspoon she was holding to slip from her grasp. The sharp clink of metal against the delicate porcelain saucer pierced the silence. She quickly bent to retrieve it, her face flushed with embarrassment as she stammered, It's a great plan. I'm sure you'll be very happy. How ironic that such a forced blessing came from the lips of my rival. I knew that inside, she was likely screaming, consumed by jealousy. She had come here hoping to carve out a place for herself in our lives, but all she found was a firm declaration of a future where she simply didn't fit. Our significant assets, strong family bonds, and long-term plans formed an impenetrable barrier, safeguarding our marriage, a barrier that someone like her, with nothing substantial to offer, could never hope to break down. I continued my psychological maneuvering, now focusing on the financial aspect. I announced to Marcellus, I'll make the transfer for the house down payment tomorrow, so please sign the papers for the title change promptly. My hair was black and short. That hair was undoubtedly Connie's. Faced with such irrefutable evidence, Marcellus crumbled completely. There was no way to deny it or to offer excuses any longer. His mask of hypocritical morality had been torn away, revealing his true, deceitful nature. He let his arms fall to his sides and sank into the sofa with an expression of utter despair. And then he began to cry, tears of a grown man, something I had rarely witnessed. I'm sorry. I lost my mind for a moment. She bewitched me. Please forgive me, just this one time. A belated apology and a cowardly excuse, placing the blame on someone else. Cheating men always rely on the same tired script. I succumbed to temptation. I couldn't help it. Seeing him cry froze my heart. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the pot of oxtail stew he had so carefully prepared all afternoon. Under Marcellus's astonished gaze, I dumped the entire contents into the trash can in the corner. The delicious aroma of the stew mingled with the sour smell of garbage, creating a nauseating stench. I turned to Marcellus and delivered my final verdict. My love for you is like this stew. It was once delicious and precious, but once it's contaminated, it's nothing but trash. And I don't eat trash. My act of throwing away the food was like a bucket of cold water for Marcellus, who seemed to awaken from his delusion. He realized I wasn't joking. The determination in my eyes and actions signaled an irrevocable break. Marcellus ran towards me, fell to his knees, and wrapped his arms around my legs. He cried inconsolably, begging me not to leave him, not to divorce him. He swore he would end everything with Connie, that he would even quit his job if necessary, that he would do anything to undo his mistake. He appealed to our parents, to our 6 years of marriage, trying to hold me back. I remained as rigid as a stone, letting him cry, clinging to my legs. My heart was already dead. His promises now only filled me with disgust. Now, before me lay a vast sky full of hope. I'm Ayana. I'm 32 years old. I'm single, independent, and happy. I smiled and took a sip of wine. The bitter taste of the wine and the sweet aftertaste it leaves in the throat mirrors my life. Now, I suppose you have to experience the bitterness to truly savor the sweetness of freedom. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's connect in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can continue to bring you more stories like this. Thank you so much for your kind support. I'm looking forward to reading your comments on the story. On the screen, you can find links to 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel, so don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect. I wanted him to be completely unaware when the show began. I placed the smartphone back exactly where it had been, at the precise angle. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the repressed rage boiling deep within my soul. I looked at Marcellus's back. He was still the same man, still wearing the same devoted facade, but now, in my eyes, everything about him seemed repulsive and hypocritical. He was playing the role of the perfect husband, but his mind was likely drifting off to his young, pretty mistress. If he wanted to act in this farce so badly, I would make damn sure I directed the tragic final scene myself. I smoothed my hair, composed my expression, and tried to regain my usual state of calm. The storm raging inside me remained hidden behind a serene gaze, waiting for the opportune moment to level everything in its path. This was going to be a very long night. Marcellus served the steaming oxtails in a large serving dish and placed it in the center of the table. The intoxicating aroma of allspice, thyme, and beef permeated the dining room. With a cloth, he meticulously wiped away even the smallest splash on the rim of the plate. Just yesterday, this gesture would have moved me to the point of embracing him. Today, however, looking at that stew was like looking at poison coated in sugar. He filled my plate with fluffy white rice and, selecting the most succulent piece of meat, placed it on top. In his warm, deep voice, he said, "Eat while it's hot, baby." I cooked the meat until it falls right off the bone. He even bragged about going to 3 different markets to find the best cuts, all just to take care of me the way I deserved. I accepted the plate from my husband's hands, making a superhuman effort to keep them from trembling. I brought a piece of meat to my mouth and chewed slowly. It was incredibly tender, and the gravy had just the right amount of spice that I loved. I deliberately emphasized that the house would be in both our names, a clear statement of ownership over our shared assets, a subtle warning that everything Marcellus possessed was intertwined with me, and that leaving me would mean losing everything. Marcellus, drenched in sweat, simply nodded, wishing I would just be quiet, stop tormenting him with these sweet words about our future that felt more terrifying than a knife to the throat. He understood perfectly well the warning concealed beneath each of my carefully chosen words. Don't be foolish and risk everything you've built for a fleeting moment of pleasure. The conversation about the house and children seemed to drain the last bit of energy from Connie. She seemed to shrink into the armchair, clutching her glass of water with both hands as if seeking warmth that had long since vanished. I alternated my gaze between the cheap plastic cup in her hands and the gold-rimmed cup in mine. Feeling a cruel satisfaction, I lifted my cup, took a slow sip, and savored the delicate aroma of the high-quality green tea. I commented on how delicious the tea was, praising its clear and smooth taste. I offered some to Connie, but my gaze lingered on her inexpensive plastic cup with a hint of false pity. "Connie, are you sure water is enough for you? Would you like me to make you some orange juice? Water is a bit plain, don't you think?" My voice was gentle, like a charitable woman giving alms to a beggar, but with an underlying layer of contempt. Connie quickly waved her hands in denial. No, I'm fine. I was just thirsty. Water is enough. I don't want to be a bother." The word bother she used seemed almost comical. Her very presence here at this hour was the ultimate intrusion. I placed my cup back on the table. The crisp, solid sound of porcelain against glass resonated in the room. I turned my attention to Marcellus, who was still sitting like a corpse, his eyes fixed on the tips of his shoes. If he had truly valued our 6 years of love, he wouldn't have slept with another woman. If he had truly cared about our parents, he wouldn't have. Having allowed things to deteriorate to this point, I coldly disengaged his hands and took a step back. I looked at him with pity, saying, "Preserve what little dignity you have left. Don't debase yourself further. My decision is final." I turned and headed straight for the bedroom. Inside the closet was the large suitcase I had packed earlier. I pulled it out and tossed in a few more clothes and my essential personal items. I didn't take much, only what was truly mine. The house, the furniture, all now seemed tainted by his betrayal. I walked back to the living room with the suitcase. Marcellus was still on the floor, his head in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. His wails echoed in the silent space. I placed a sheet of paper I had printed earlier on the table. It was the promissory note for the $40,000 my parents had lent us at the start of our marriage when we couldn't afford the condo renovation, along with the receipts clearly showing my father's name. This $40,000 is a clear debt. Don't even think about shirking it. When you sell the house, the first order of business will be to settle this debt, and then we'll split the rest, I told Marcellus in an icy tone. Get ready to pay back every last cent. The house is in both our names, but I won't fight for it. I concede it to you, so you can live here with your mistress, but my parents' money?
You have to return it to me.
Marcellus looked at the papers and then at me, his expression one of utter despair. He knew he couldn't come up with that much money quickly, but I didn't care. It was the price he had to pay for his infidelity. I wanted him to feel the full weight of his loss, both emotionally and financially. I dragged the suitcase toward the door. Before leaving, I took one last look at the house. But as I swallowed, I tasted a bitter, nauseating flavor, as if I were chewing ashes. I had to take a large gulp of water to keep from gagging. I looked at the man sitting across from me. Marcellus ate with gusto, offering me sides every now and then and recounting funny stories from work. He talked about a new project, how the CEO had congratulated him, and his plans for a promotion this year, but he didn't utter a single word about Keelani or that young intern. I wondered how a person could lead a double life with such ease, able to receive an "I miss you" from his mistress and then, moments later, play the role of the exemplary husband who adores his wife. Maybe, during our 6 years of marriage, he had repeated that performance so many times that even I couldn't distinguish between what was real and what was fake anymore. I remembered our humble beginnings when we first got married. We started with nothing, living in a small studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. Marcellus took my hand and swore he would work tirelessly so I would never want for anything, so we could have a decent home. And he kept his promise. This luxury condo, all these comforts, were a testament to our shared hard work and determination. But it seems that as material wealth grew, people's hearts began to change, too. Satiety gave way to base desires, and the devoted wife who once shared a simple sandwich with him now seemed bland compared to the fresh, young women outside. Feigning fullness, I put down my silverware, saying I was a little tired and didn't have much appetite. Marcellus immediately adopted a concerned expression. He got up, walked over to me, and placed his hand on my forehead to check if I had a fever. His hand was warm, but as soon as it touched my skin, I felt a chill that soaked me to the bone. I turned my head slightly to avoid his hypocritical touch, excusing myself to get a glass of water. I glanced sideways at the clock on the wall. I decided to draw him further into this unsettling game. I instructed him to cut some apples for our guest. A man of the house should be a gentleman. How can you have a guest sitting there without attending to her needs? Marcellus, as if jolted by an electric shock, jumped up and headed to the kitchen to retrieve the apples and a knife. He peeled the fruit clumsily, his hands shaking, leaving the skin jagged and uneven. The man who once carved flowers out of carrots for me couldn't even manage to peel a simple apple in front of his mistress. Now his mind was a jumbled mess. Fear had paralyzed his senses and abilities. When he placed the plate of sliced apples on the table, I pierced the most appealing piece with a fork and brought it directly to Marcellus's mouth. "Open up, baby. Let me feed you. Don't touch it with your hands, they're dirty." Marcellus hesitated for a moment, but finally accepted the apple one offered. The display of a couple affectionately feeding each other in front of a third party was both natural and incredibly provocative. I pushed the plate of apples towards Connie.
You eat too, Connie.
These are Honeycrisp, very crunchy and sweet. Connie glanced at the piece of apple Marcellus had just eaten, and then at the plate in front of her, as if a knot had formed in her throat. How could she possibly swallow a bite while witnessing such a public display of affection? The preferential treatment wasn't limited to the cups, but extended to all the attention and care. I was the wife. I had the right to publicly care for my husband and to be cared for by him. She, on the other hand, no matter how much Marcellus desired her in private, was an intruder here, a captive audience to our marital happiness. I noticed Connie's eyes beginning to redden. She was likely crying inside, or perhaps regretting the foolishness of coming here to be humiliated in this way. But I felt not even a trace of sympathy. What had once been our cherished home had now become a tomb, a mausoleum of my love. I opened the door and stepped out into the breezy hallway. The sound of the door closing behind me echoed one final time, marking the end of 6 years of my youth wasted on that shameless man. Without a backward glance, I walked with a steady gait towards the elevator. A new life awaited me. It would be challenging, no doubt, but at least it would be clean and peaceful. The Uber sped through the deserted city streets. Sitting in the back seat, I watched the fleeting streetlights. My mind was blank, yet strangely clear. I didn't cry. The tears seemed to have dried up inside, crystallizing into a sharp, unwavering determination. I was heading to Lysandra's apartment. My best friend since college, Lysandra was a highly regarded lawyer in the city, specializing in divorce and asset disputes. She was strong, decisive, and remarkably intelligent. I had given her a heads up, so she was already waiting for me in the lobby when I arrived. Seeing me emerge from the car, gaunt-faced and dragging the suitcase, Lysandra asked no questions. She simply approached and gave me a tight, comforting hug. At that warm gesture of friendship, I nearly broke down, but I held it together. It wasn't the time to show any weakness. Lysandra took me up to her apartment. It was a small but cozy space, filled with the soothing scent of lemongrass essential oil. She offered me a glass of hot tea and encouraged me to sit down and tell her everything. And so I did. I recounted everything, from the fateful message I saw, to the elaborate theater I staged to lure Connie to our home, the confrontation with Marcellus, and ultimately, my decision to leave. I spoke with surprising composure, as if narrating someone else's story. When I finished, Lysandra slammed her hand on the table with a dull thud. The hour hand was approaching 7 and the minute hand was pointing to 12. Time was passing with agonizing slowness. From her office or her student apartment, it would take her between 30 and 45 minutes to get here. I wasn't going to let this golden opportunity slip by. My wife isn't home today. That invitation was more potent than any love spell. When I returned to the table, Marcellus was already clearing the plates. He told me to go relax in the living room, that he would take care of the cleanup. The image of my husband rolling up his sleeves to wash dishes, an image I used to brag about to my girlfriends, now seemed like just another scene in his disgusting charade. I sat on the sofa and picked up the TV remote, but I didn't turn it on. My gaze was fixed on the front door, and my ears were attuned to any sound from the hallway. A fierce battle was raging in my mind. Part of me wished she wouldn't come, that it had all been a bad joke, so I could continue to deceive myself. But the other half, the colder and crueler side, yearned for the doorbell to ring as soon as possible. I wanted this pain to surface in all its rawness, because an abscess only heals when it bursts, even if the scar it leaves behind is permanent. Every minute passed with unbearable weight. The sound of water running in the kitchen ceased. Marcellus came out, drying his hands with a towel, and asked if I wanted some fruit for dessert. I shook my head and managed a weak smile. It was surely a forced, crooked smile, but Marcellus didn't seem to notice. He was too confident in his own perfection. Or maybe he had simply never cared enough about my feelings to notice anything amiss in my eyes. The clock struck exactly 8 p.m. The apartment was so silent you could hear the ticking of the second hand. Marcellus sat on the sofa opposite me and started reading the news on his phone, his expression completely serene. He probably thought it would be another peaceful evening with his wife. My compassion had died the moment I saw the message, "I miss you," on his phone screen. Mercy is a luxury I don't extend to those who attempt to destroy the happiness of another's home. Silence once again filled the living room, but this time the air felt thick with tension, almost like gunpowder. Connie, perhaps to alleviate the pressure or to try to salvage some semblance of respect in front of Marcellus, cleared her throat and tentatively inquired about his health. "Boss, how's your stomach feeling? Is it hurting less?" Her voice was soft, but laced with genuine concern. She even offered to ask her mother to send a jar of honey with black garlic from her hometown down south, which, according to her, was very beneficial for stomach ailments. Upon hearing that, Marcellus's face turned ashen. He quickly waved his hands in denial, insisting he was fine and that it wasn't necessary. He shot a furtive glance at me, terrified, knowing his foolish mistress had just made a critical error. She was revealing knowledge of her boss's personal life that far exceeded the boundaries of a normal professional relationship. I let out a laugh, a short, icy chuckle that sent shivers down both their spines. I fixed Connie with a piercing stare, as if I could see directly into her soul. "Wow, Connie, you certainly seem concerned about your boss. Look at that. The wife who shares his bed hasn't even gotten around to making him that honey with black garlic. But you, an intern who's been here for just a few months, how do you know about his health problems too?" I deliberately emphasized the words "shares his bed" to remind Connie of her place. I pressed my attack, without relenting. "Does Marcellus complain about his pains at the office in front of you? Or do you spend so much time alone together that you know the details of his diet?" Connie was left speechless. Her face flushed from red to purple. She cursed under her breath and told me I had done exactly the right thing, that a cheating man is beyond redemption, and that my handling of the mistress had been masterful, civilized, yet devastatingly cruel. Lysandra began to analyze the situation from a legal standpoint. She reviewed the evidence I had gathered, the bank statements, the text messages, the photos. She nodded, confirming that I had more than enough to win in court. She offered to take my case if Marcellus refused a mutual agreement divorce. But Lysandra insisted that before going to court, we needed to teach that perfect couple a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Divorce was my liberation, but true justice lay in punishing the betrayer. She proposed a more subtle plan for revenge. Instead of creating a public scene or exposing him on social media and becoming the subject of city gossip, we would target what mattered most to Marcellus, his career and his reputation. Lysandra instructed me to compile all the evidence into a single file. She said she would help me draft a whistleblower email to send to Marcellus's superiors at work, a devastating blow to his finances and credibility. It would be far more painful than a physical altercation. I nodded in agreement. Our eyes met, and determination blazed within them. That night would be dedicated to planning the ultimate battle. The 2 days of the weekend passed in an eerie silence. Marcellus didn't stop calling and texting, but I ignored him. I turned off my phone and devoted all my time at Lysandra's to preparing the special gift for my soon-to-be ex-husband and his mistress. Lysandra helped me draft the email. Instead of resorting to insults or defamation, we used professional, objective, and sharp language, as if composing a formal indictment. The subject line of the email was concise but powerful. Report on internal code of conduct violation and inappropriate relationship between team lead and intern. Or maybe he was already planning what message he would send his mistress as soon as I fell asleep. He had no idea that the storm was about to break right at his doorstep. Ding dong. The sound of the doorbell shattered the silence. It wasn't a loud sound, but in that space, it resonated like the gunshot signaling the start of a war. Marcellus lifted his head, startled. His eyes showed surprise mixed with a hint of confusion. He glanced at the clock, then at the door and muttered, "Who could that be at this hour?" Then, he looked at me as if I might have the answer. I remained motionless on the sofa, maintaining an almost icy composure. "Stay seated. I told him, my voice soft but firm, leaving him no room to argue. I stood up and walked slowly toward the door. Every step on the hardwood floor sounded heavy, like the hammer blows driving the final nails into a coffin. My heart was pounding hard, not from fear, but with the strange exhilaration of a hunter about to ensnare their prey. I took a deep breath, straightened my posture, and placed my hand on the doorknob. I turned the lock and pulled open the heavy wooden door. Standing before me was a young black woman, petite and well made up, but with a face that still retained a hint of childishness. She was wearing a tight dress that accentuated her youthful figure, and in her hands, she held a small box with a carefully packaged cupcake. The instant she saw me, the flirtatious smile that had been playing on her lips vanished, replaced by an expression of pure panic. Her eyes widened, her pupils contracted in fear, and her face, previously flushed, turned as pale as paper. She froze, and her trembling hands almost dropped the cake box. She had expected Marcellus to answer the door. She had surely envisioned the scene, jumping into his arms, telling him in a honeyed voice how much she had missed him. She stammered that she had simply seen him in the office clutching his stomach with a grimace of pain and had asked out of pure concern. A pathetic excuse. I knew Marcellus's stomach problems were chronic. To maintain his image as a strong leader, he rarely displayed any signs of weakness in public. He only did so when he was alone with someone he trusted. I shot Marcellus a withering look. And you? Why are you going around worrying your employees at work? Next time you're not feeling well, tell your wife. Don't make other people worry, and offer you medicine. They're going to start thinking your wife doesn't take care of you. The other day, you told me you were running late because of a dinner with clients, and your stomach was bothering you. I see now what kind of dinner with clients that was. At my pointed remark, Marcellus lowered his head and remained silent. He knew exactly what I was alluding to. The night he used the excuse of a work dinner, he had actually dined with Connie and, likely to gain the young girl's sympathy, had complained about his stomach pains. I had just exposed the hypocrisy of a coworker's concern and revealed the raw truth of their ambiguous relationship. Her excessive interest was proof she had crossed a line, and I, as his wife, had every right to question and expose that hypocrisy right here in my own home. The clock on the wall struck 9 p.m. The cat-and-mouse game had reached its climax. I felt it was time to deliver the coup de grace, a blow that would completely shatter the intruder's morale and serve as a final warning to my treacherous husband. I slowly retrieved my phone from my pocket and placed it on the table. I swiped across the screen, pretending to check a message, and then sighed dramatically. The world is so complicated these days. The news is filled with stories of infidelity and scandals. My girlfriends tell me that young girls these days are incredibly bold. I scanned all the evidence, the WhatsApp screenshots with the suggestive conversations, the bank statements proving the use of a salary for gifts, the misappropriation of company funds, the photo of the movie tickets during work hours as proof of professional negligence. Lysandra organized everything into a single PDF file of over 10 megabytes, clearly noting dates, times, and locations. Monday morning, the sky was overcast, as if foreshadowing an impending storm. At precisely 9 a.m., the time when all office workers were at their desks, checking their emails, I turned on the computer. Lysandra, sitting beside me, placed a hand on my shoulder in a gesture of support. I took a deep breath and reviewed the draft one last time. The recipient list included the CEO, the HR director, and the heads of the involved departments. I didn't send it en masse to the entire company. I had no desire to become a source of cheap gossip. I only sent it to those with the authority to decide Marcellus's and Connie's fates. The mouse cursor hovered over the send button. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the palpable tension of the decisive moment. A single click would irrevocably alter the lives of 3 people. Marcellus would lose the career he had painstakingly built for 10 years. Connie would lose the future that was just beginning to blossom. And I would finally put an end to a painful chapter and begin a new one. I remembered Connie's brazen look upon arriving at my house. I remembered Marcellus's cowardice, kneeling and begging for forgiveness. I remembered the oxtails thrown in the trash. The last vestige of compassion within me vanished. "Goodbye, ex-husband," I whispered to myself as I pressed firmly on the left mouse button.
Sent.
A brief, emotionless notification appeared on the computer screen. The email, loaded with a potential death sentence for Marcellus's and Connie's careers, had been dispatched. I leaned back in the chair and let out a long sigh of relief. But the harsh reality that confronted her was the image of me, the lady of the house, his lawful wife, blocking the entrance with a gaze as sharp as a knife. I said nothing at first. I simply observed her terrified expression in silence. My silence made the atmosphere even more suffocating. Connie took a half step back, moving her lips as if she wanted to say something, but her throat seemed constricted, as if someone were strangling her. She looked toward the interior of the condo, and then back at me with a look of a thief caught red-handed. I heard Marcellus's footsteps behind me. "Who is it, babe? Why are you taking so long?" he asked. His voice plunged Connie into even greater confusion. She looked around as if searching for an escape route, but I wasn't going to let my prey escape that easily. I smiled. It was probably a smile more terrifying than tears. And then I spoke, my voice loud and clear enough for both the person inside and the one outside to hear, filled with a chilling authority. "Hello, Connie. Are you here to see my husband?" My question was like a bucket of ice water thrown on Connie, and a shockwave for Marcellus, who was approaching. I saw Connie visibly shudder. She realized she had walked into a trap, but there was no turning back now. The door was open. The show had officially begun. Connie was shrinking like a little bird that had accidentally fallen into an eagle's nest. She squeezed the cake box so hard her knuckles turned white. Stammering, she barely managed to articulate a few words to justify her untimely appearance at this hour. She said she had heard Marcellus was feeling unwell, and since she was passing by the neighborhood, she decided to bring him a cupcake, hoping he would recover soon so he could continue teaching her. A pathetic lie. I knew perfectly well that Marcellus wasn't sick, and that this gated community was so secluded that it was impossible to pass by unless you came on purpose. But I didn't correct her. They send messages to other women's husbands as if they were their own boyfriends, without even the slightest bit of shame. I paused, carefully observing their reactions. Connie remained motionless, but her breathing had quickened. Marcellus was surreptitiously wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. The tension in the air was like a guitar string stretched to its breaking point. I sharpened my tone even further and continued. I also frequently check Marcellus's phone to help him with work-related things, and lately, I've been seeing a lot of messages from unknown numbers. A young girl, from the looks of it, with a very innocent-sounding name. Must be an intern. She sends very affectionate messages to Marcellus. I glanced sideways at Connie. Her face had completely lost its color. Her lips, previously painted a deep red, were now white and trembling. With a mocking smile, I delivered the final blow. "You know what, Connie? Just the other day, I was home, and my husband was making dinner, and suddenly a girl sends a message to his phone saying, 'I miss you.' The nerve, don't you think? With a wife right at home, daring to send a message like that. Was she trying to challenge me?" My words hit Connie like a bolt of lightning. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. She had finally understood everything. The "I miss you" message from a while ago, the reply, "Come over. My wife isn't home today." It had all been a trap, a carefully constructed trap that I had set myself, and she, like a foolish moth, had flown directly into it. Connie's hands and feet began to tremble uncontrollably. She looked at me as if she were seeing a monster. She realized that the woman sitting across from her wasn't a docile and naive housewife, but a master of psychological warfare. It was over. The arrow had been released, and nothing could stop it. Now, all that was left was to wait for the storm to break over the traitors' heads. That Monday, the atmosphere at Marcellus's company must have been as stifling as the night Connie came to our house. According to an acquaintance who worked in the same department, your email created a massive impact and spread like wildfire within minutes. Marcellus tried to maintain a facade of normality upon arriving at work, but inside, he must have been consumed by panic. At 10 a.m., the HR director summoned him to a conference room. There, they presented undeniable proof that he had used the corporate card for personal expenses with Connie and had falsified receipts for business meals. It was textbook embezzlement, and he was suspended without pay pending a full audit. Marcellus stood up, his face as pale as wax. He opened his mouth to offer excuses, to claim it was a misunderstanding, a slanderous attack. But the HR director raised a hand firmly, cutting him off. On the table, he left a thick folder containing a printout of the very PDF file I had sent. Faced with such irrefutable evidence, Marcellus was rendered speechless. 2 security guards approached and instructed him to gather his personal belongings and leave the office immediately. Everyone was stunned to see the man, who until then had been a respected team lead, being escorted out of the company like a common criminal. Marcellus walked in silence, head bowed, amidst the whispers and stares of his colleagues. That public humiliation would leave an indelible stain on his career. I, from Lysandra's apartment, received the news by phone without feeling the slightest emotion. I didn't laugh with satisfaction, nor did I feel any pity. It was the price of betrayal. When he trampled on our marriage and chased his own selfish desires, he had signed the death warrant for his career. 3 days later, his termination was officially announced. The fun of the cat-and-mouse game lies in not killing the mouse immediately, but toying with it until it's exhausted from pure terror. Maintaining a faint smile, I fixed my gaze on her face, which was changing color by the moment. Seeing that Connie was about to turn around and flee, I said in a voice cold as ice, "If you take a single step out of this hallway, tomorrow the entire company and your parents back home will receive the photos and messages of you two. Come inside. Let's talk calmly, and I'll let you keep a shred of your dignity." Connie stood rooted to the spot, trembling. She followed me reluctantly inside. I told her that since she was here, she could take the opportunity to see the house, that the vibe was very cozy. I emphasized that I wanted to formally introduce her to my husband, elongating the word husband on purpose, as if stamping a seal of ownership on the man frozen behind me. Marcellus had already reached the living room. Seeing me enter with Connie, his face crumbled even more than hers. His eyes were bulging and his mouth hung open, but he was incapable of saying anything. The phone he had been holding fell onto the sofa. He looked back and forth between Connie and me, oscillating violently between panic and confusion. He couldn't understand why Connie was here, or why I was receiving her so calmly. I led Connie to the center of the living room and sat her on the armchair facing the large sofa where Marcellus usually sat. Connie perched on the edge of the seat with her back straight and knees pressed together, not daring to look up. I turned to Marcellus and gestured for him to sit next to me. Like a soulless automaton, he walked haltingly to the sofa. Even though the AC was set to 75 degrees, beads of sweat were forming on his forehead. He sat as far away from me as possible, as if I were a bomb about to explode. I began with the introductions. I had known everything from the beginning, yet I had acted with complete naturalness, inviting her in, serving her water, offering her cake, and then I had methodically stripped away her pretense layer by layer, until she was left completely exposed in her own shame. Marcellus, beside me, was also in shock. He turned towards me with a look of pure horror. He never would have imagined that I had seen that message, and that I was twisted enough to lure Connie here and humiliate her in this way. My intelligence and cruelty sent a chill down his spine. He realized he had vastly underestimated his wife. I looked Connie directly in the eyes. My gaze was cold and contemptuous. I didn't need to say anything more. My silence was the most severe form of condemnation. I had revealed everything, but I still hadn't spoken her name directly. I wanted to see if she had even the smallest shred of dignity left to retreat on her own. It was the last act of mercy I would grant her before she left this house. Connie couldn't endure it any longer. The invisible pressure radiating from me, Marcellus's cowardice, and the cruel truth that had just been revealed crushed her spirit. Every second must have felt like torture, as if she were sitting in an electric chair. She hastily grabbed the purse she had left beside her. In her haste, the bag bumped against the chair with a muffled thud. She scrambled to her feet, but her legs wobbled, and she almost fell. Without daring to look me in the face, her head bowed, she mumbled that she had to leave. She made the excuse that something urgent had come up at home, that her mother had called her back right away, and that she was sorry she couldn't stay any longer. Her voice was strained, on the verge of tears. Without waiting for a response, she headed for the door, fleeing like a thief caught in the act. The cake box was left abandoned on the table, a testament to the utter failure of her visit. The reason, communicated in an internal memo, was a serious violation of professional ethics and damage to the company's image and trust. Marcellus not only lost his job, but was also placed on the blacklist of HR managers in the industry. In this city, rumors travel faster than the wind. Once your moral reputation is tarnished, especially by a scandal involving a subordinate, the doors to your career slam shut almost completely. The financial consequences followed swiftly, like a tidal wave. Marcellus lost his primary source of income, but the bank loans continued to come due punctually. The car payments, the condo mortgage, the credit card bills, everything became a noose tightening around his neck. Before, thanks to his high salary and my careful management, he had lived comfortably, without a care for prices. Now, just the monthly bank interest was causing him to sweat bullets. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was Marcellus's number. Seeing the name, husband, flashing on the screen, I let out a dry laugh and changed his name in my contacts to Marcellus Ruiz. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it stopped. Then the messages started arriving. At first, they were pleading, begging for forgiveness, asking me to withdraw the report to give him a chance to start over. When I didn't reply, the tone shifted to accusations, calling me cruel and heartless for ruining his life. I skimmed them and deleted them all.
Cool?
When he was in bed with another woman while I waited for him at home with dinner, did he consider the word cruel? When he used our joint money to buy expensive gifts for his mistress, did he think about my efforts? I had only claimed what was rightfully mine. Even his parents, who lived down south, called me. My mother-in-law, crying, insulted me, calling me a bad wife, the one who had destroyed her husband and her family. She said it was normal for a man to have an affair, that a woman should endure it to maintain peace in the home. Pointing to Connie, I told Marcellus that she was the wonderful intern he had talked so much about, who had come to visit him in the middle of the night with a cupcake after hearing her boss was sick. Then I introduced Marcellus to Connie, saying he was the most exemplary husband in the world, a man who had never disappointed me. Each of my compliments was like a needle piercing Marcellus's skin. I saw him visibly shrink. I noticed Connie shooting a pleading look at Marcellus. She expected a word from him, an excuse, a reassuring gesture to rescue her from this predicament. But all she received was cowardly evasion. Marcellus kept his head down, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt, not daring to utter a word. His cowardice did nothing but intensify my contempt, and I'm sure even Connie began to feel a pang of disappointment. The man who seemed so admirable and authoritative in the office had, upon being caught in his infidelity, turned into a pathetic little man who feared his wife more than a lion. I stood up, announcing that I was going to offer our guests something to drink. I asked Connie what she would like: orange juice, water, or some hot tea. In a barely audible voice, she replied that water would be fine. I smiled and headed to the kitchen. The living room was plunged into a tomb-like silence. I knew that as soon as I left, those two would exchange panicked glances, but they wouldn't dare speak for fear that I would overhear them. And that was exactly what I wanted, to let the terror slowly consume their minds. In the kitchen, I made a point of making noise, taking out glasses and plates so they knew I was still close by, listening to everything. I opened the cabinet and passed right by the expensive Waterford crystal we reserved for special guests. My hand stopped at a package of flimsy disposable plastic cups, the kind you would use for a cookout or find at a water cooler. I took one of those cups and filled it with tap water. The choice wasn't accidental. Marcellus made a move to stand, probably to walk her out or apologize, but I was quicker. I placed my hand firmly on his thigh and squeezed hard, signaling him to remain seated. My gaze hardened, warning him not to do anything foolish in this situation. Marcellus understood my message and remained frozen in place, watching Connie's back as she disappeared behind the door. I rose and followed her slowly towards the entrance. I walked with a calm and assured demeanor, in stark contrast to her frantic state. Connie was struggling to put on her shoes, but her hands were shaking so violently that she couldn't manage it. I leaned against the doorframe with my arms crossed, observing her with a mixture of pity and contempt. When she finally managed to slip on her shoes and was preparing to open the door to the hallway, I called out, "Connie." She stopped dead in her tracks, startled, and turned around with a scared, pleading look. She probably feared I would make a scene in the hallway, insult her, or grab her by the hair, but I wouldn't. My dignity wouldn't allow me to behave like some common thug. I approached her and whispered in her ear, so softly that only the two of us could hear. My voice was as gentle as a breeze, but as cold as ancient ice. "Next time you plan to visit my husband, call first. If you're seen wandering around here at this time of night, the neighbors might get the wrong idea and think something shady is going on in this respectable building. And remember this, Marcellus's wife isn't always out of the house." Upon hearing my words, Connie's face drained of all color. She nodded repeatedly, like a chicken pecking. She stammered a yes and hurried towards the elevator. She pressed the button frantically, as if she wanted to escape from there as quickly as possible. Her figure, small, alone, and pathetic, was silhouetted against the bright light of the hallway. I watched her until the elevator doors closed, swallowing her whole. A faint smile played on my lips. Hearing that, I felt a bitter resignation for the fate of women. I told my mother-in-law calmly that I couldn't live with a traitor and hung up. I also blocked the numbers of his entire family. I didn't want to hear any more lectures on hypocritical morality. Marcellus had lost everything, literally everything. His wife, his family, his career, his reputation, and now he was drowning in debt. He would wander through that large but empty apartment, facing the four walls and crushing loneliness. It was the fairest punishment for someone who hadn't valued what he had. Connie's fate wasn't much different. As soon as Marcellus was suspended, she was also summoned to HR. She entered the room with swollen eyes and a haggard appearance, a far cry from the confident and flirtatious image she had projected that night. The decision to terminate her internship contract was immediate. The reason? Violation of internal conduct rules and detriment to the work environment. Connie cried, begged for a second chance, said she was young and had fallen into temptation. But in the ruthless corporate world, those naive excuses are worthless. She was employed at a major corporation. Being fired with cause meant that the doors to her future had closed considerably. Worse than losing her job was the contempt of her peers. The story of the brazen mistress who had challenged the legitimate wife became the hottest topic in the anonymous company chat rooms. When Connie was packing her belongings into a cardboard box, no one approached to speak to her or offer help. Everyone looked at her with disdain, whispering behind her back. The men who used to flirt with her now avoided her like the plague, fearing association with the scandal. Connie left the office alone, carrying her box. The long, empty hallway seemed like the path of thorns awaiting her. In front of the elevator, she crossed paths with the same security guard who had witnessed her triumphant entrance just days before. I wanted to belittle Connie through the smallest detail. I wanted her to understand that her place in this house, in our life, was as cheap and disposable as that cup, an object you use and throw away, not worth keeping. I returned to the living room with a tray and placed the plastic cup of water in front of Connie. For Marcellus and myself, however, I served tea in elegant fine china cups with gold rims. The stark contrast between the two types of vessels was glaringly obvious on the glass table. Connie looked at the plastic cup, so out of place on the luxurious table, and her face flushed a deep red with humiliation. She understood the message. It was a wordless insult, but deeper and more cutting than any spoken slur. I sat next to Marcellus, this time deliberately pressing close to him. I took his arm and rested my head on his shoulder in an affectionate gesture. Marcellus stiffened like a wooden doll, his muscles tense with anxiety. Through his fine shirt, I could feel the frantic pounding of his heart. Cold sweat continued to trickle down his temples. I initiated the conversation with hypocritically social questions. I asked Connie how the internship was going, if Marcellus was very demanding with her, and if he ever harassed the interns. As I spoke, I caressed Marcellus's arm and shot him adoring glances every now and then. Connie replied in monosyllables, not daring to look directly at the tender scene unfolding before her eyes. In her gaze, I saw a mixture of envy, bitterness, and fear. She was witnessing how the man she coveted belonged legally and completely to another woman. The sweet promises Marcellus must have whispered to her when they were alone became insignificant in the face of this crushing reality. The air in the room was so thick you could barely breathe. Not even the soft hum of the central air conditioning could dissipate the suffocating atmosphere. One down. The young prey had been given a good scare. Now, not even a hefty sum of money would entice her to approach my husband again. But the war wasn't over. The main enemy, the one who had inflicted the deepest wound, was still sitting in the living room. I turned and slammed the door shut. The sharp sound of the lock reverberated through the apartment, signaling the beginning of the trial for the treacherous husband. I took a deep breath, regained my icy composure, and walked back inside. The wooden door closed, completely isolating this apartment, now charged with a deadly atmosphere, from the outside world. The smile of victory that had graced my lips vanished like a candle extinguished in the wind. I didn't immediately return to the living room. I paused for a few seconds, clutching the cold doorknob. The waves of nausea rising from my stomach were almost unbearable. I had delivered a brilliant performance, but the price was a deep wound, bleeding in my heart. I turned and walked slowly into the living room. Marcellus was still in the same spot, motionless on the cream-colored leather sofa. His head was bowed, his hands clasped tightly over his knees. His appearance was pathetic, a far cry from the sophisticated, self-assured husband he used to be. But his misery didn't elicit even the slightest bit of sympathy from me. On the contrary, it only intensified my contempt. I walked towards him, picked up his smartphone, which lay discarded on the table, glanced at him, then at the phone, and suddenly, with a swift movement, I smashed it against the glass tabletop. Asterisk crack. The sharp, violent sound shattered the oppressive silence. The phone screen splintered into a million pieces, the cracks spreading like a spiderweb, a perfect reflection of our marriage. At that moment, Marcellus jolted, looking at me with a face pale with terror. I crossed my arms and looked down at him with an icy glare, my voice sharp and firm, devoid of any emotion. The man's look of pity was the final straw, and Connie finally broke down, sobbing loudly. She fled the building, leaving behind the mocking gazes of her former colleagues. According to what Lysandra told me, after that incident, Connie couldn't bear the stares and moved apartments. She set all her social media accounts to private and disappeared from the virtual world. It was a painful lesson for a young woman just starting out in life. She had tried to trade her beauty and youth for something fleeting. But in the end, she lost the most valuable assets a woman can possess, her honor and her self-respect. I didn't feel sorry for Connie. She had chosen that path, disregarding morals and ethics, and she faced the consequences. I only hoped that after this devastating failure, she would learn to live a more ethical life moving forward. 2 months later, we met again in court for the divorce settlement hearing. Marcellus seemed to have aged 10 years. He had an unkempt beard and wore wrinkled clothes. He looked at me with pleading eyes, but I maintained a cold and distant demeanor. Lysandra accompanied me as my lawyer. Her presence, professional and sharp, intimidated Marcellus even more. In court, Marcellus tried to cling to the notion that he still loved me and wanted to salvage our relationship, but Lysandra presented the irrefutable evidence of his infidelity, crushing his feeble hope with a single stroke. The division of assets was the most contentious issue. The luxury condo was our largest asset. Marcellus, out of pride, wanted to keep it. He didn't want to find himself without a home. He proposed paying me my share in monthly installments. I let out a scornful laugh and shook my head firmly. I wouldn't allow any financial link to continue to bind me to my ex-husband. I felt like I was watching a tragic silent play, where every actor strove to fulfill their role, except that only I had the script and knew how it would end. Suddenly, I changed the subject and turned to Marcellus with an excited voice. I began talking about our vacation plans to St. Lucia next month. I described an idyllic future with enthusiasm: the azure sea, the white sand, the romantic candlelight dinners. I added that we were considering buying a lake house in the Blue Ridge Mountains to spend weekends growing our own garden and fishing, and that we were already planning how to care for our parents in their old age. Each of my words was a dagger piercing Connie's heart. She had to realize that she was completely excluded from Marcellus's life, the future plans, the assets, the long-term projects. All of that belonged to us as a couple. There was no room for her in that picture. She was just a fleeting whim, a temporary pleasure for Marcellus. Marcellus remained seated in complete silence, neither confirming nor denying anything. He seemed to be sitting on hot coals, wishing this psychological torture would end as soon as possible, but I wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. I wanted to brand this horrible night into both of their memories, so they would feel a shiver every time they remembered it. I turned to Connie and, with a smile, asked her a seemingly innocent question, but one loaded with meaning. I said, "Explain yourself." The message saying, "Come over. My wife isn't home today." I sent that. Did you really think I was stupid enough to not know anything? And just like that, Marcellus was left speechless, staring at me in disbelief. He hadn't expected me to reveal my hand so quickly and so forcefully. Perhaps he thought I only had vague suspicions, but he never imagined that I had been in control from the very beginning. His lips trembled as he struggled to articulate a pathetic excuse. "Baby, it's all a misunderstanding. She and I are just coworkers. Her being here today was a complete surprise to me. I swear I didn't know anything about it." He attempted to play the victim, his eyes darting away from my gaze. I let out a bitter laugh. "Coworkers? A coworker sends you a message at 8 p.m. saying she misses you? A coworker knows more about your eating habits and your ailments than your own wife? A coworker dares to come to your house thinking your wife isn't home?" I moved closer to him, looking him directly in the face, and said, emphasizing each syllable, "Don't take me for a fool. We've been together for 6 years. I know you better than you know yourself." That furtive glance, that jump when you heard the doorbell, that cowardly behavior in front of your mistress, everything gave you away. Marcellus lowered his head, unable to respond. He knew that in the face of such undeniable truth, any lie would be futile. His silence was the clearest of confessions. I felt immense disappointment. Lysandra, on my behalf, presented my conditions. Either he paid me 50% of the house's value in a single lump sum, plus the $40,000 for the renovation that my parents had contributed, or we sold the house and split the money. Of course, he would have to assume responsibility for the entire remaining mortgage. Marcellus's face, already pale from being unemployed and in debt, turned white. Where was he going to find hundreds of thousands of dollars overnight? The bank had already begun sending foreclosure notices for being 3 months behind on the mortgage. In the end, he had no choice but to agree to sell the house. The apartment, once his pride and joy, was put up for sale as a steal, below market value, to facilitate a quick sale. After paying off the mortgage, reimbursing me for my share, and repaying my parents $40,000, Marcellus was left with barely any money. He signed the divorce papers with a trembling hand. His crooked signature marked the end of 6 years of marriage. He walked out of the courthouse empty-handed, both literally and figuratively. Without a house, without a car, he had already sold it to pay debts, without a wife, and without a job. He stood alone in the sunny courtyard of the courthouse, watching in silence as I left in a cab.